I wasn't born to tell stories, I was born to swallow them. To grind them down like broken glass and keep walking, eyes on the pavement, counting bills, making transfers no one thanked me for, putting out fires that weren't mine. Yet here I am, sitting at the kitchen table, under the yellow light of a cheap lamp I bought at Home Depot, staring at my battered phone as if it were a pool of water, and I decide to say it all. Not for justice. For hygiene. So I don't poison myself. So the hatred, that dark wine that sticks to you, doesn't turn me into what I despise. They called it support, family, the right thing. And I, who had thrown myself into the strait on a raft made of planks and an engine that coughed like an asthmatic bull, believed it too, that I owed a debt. Not so much to them, my father, my mother, my brother, but to life itself, the life they loaned me when I washed up on that shore in Isla Morada with swollen feet and cracked lips, and the first American who spoke to me in Spanglish handed me a bottle of water and said, "You're safe now." Safety is a mirage that smells like chlorine. You think you've reached land, but the land is made of people, and people are a deeper sea. Tampa took me in with a sticky heat that at first felt like an embrace, and later, like a wall I learned to respect. The city doesn't love or hate you. It just watches. If you know how to read it, it opens. My first room was a studio on Nebraska Avenue with a window facing a tree I didn't know, and an air conditioner that sighed a sad kind of smoke. I worked unloading boxes at a warehouse near the port, dead shifts starting at 3 in the morning, and when I clocked out, I'd walk to the Riverwalk just to watch the water move slowly, like it was breathing. At lunchtime I'd eat a Cuban sandwich in Ybor City, those sandwiches that taste like nostalgia dressed in mustard, and stare at Jose Marti's plaque in the park, just beyond the fence, feeling that strange blend of reverence and anger you get when you worship someone but can't forget the disaster that came after. Sometimes I'd run along Bayshore Boulevard at sunset, as if the glitter of the water could wash away the salt memories of that miserable raft. I didn't know then that the deepest tide wouldn't touch my feet but my pride. Over time, things got better. A friend taught me how to install hardwood floors. I was good at it. There's something in the patience of measuring, cutting, and fitting that settles me. The mind snaps into place like the planks themselves. I bought a used truck, then another, hired a couple of guys who could keep up with my rhythm, and suddenly, without even noticing, I could pay rent in Hyde Park in advance, afford a proper dinner at a Mexican restaurant on Kennedy Boulevard, and yes, send money to Havana, like clockwork, as constant as the sun's tax. I started with $200 every Tuesday. Then $500 on the first of every month. Then the Atexa top-ups so their internet wouldn't cut out, the cable, the phone lines for my parents and my brother, the salaries of the 2 maids in the Miramar house who took turns cleaning, cooking, and, as my mother said, keeping an eye on Grandma, the same grandmother who had already died before I left. And the boxes of food, massive monthly shipments, oil, powdered milk, pasta, canned goods, soap, detergent, coffee. Things that over there gleamed like gold. I'd look at the invoice and my fingers would tremble, not from pain, but from shame. Shame for them, for needing to ask, for me, for being the one giving, and for the neighbors beside them, who had no one abroad. Guilt has a gray tint that sticks under your nails. The first crack wasn't a scream. It was a click. The stupid little sound of a screenshot. I was in line at the Publix on Gandhi Boulevard, with a chicken in my basket and a box of cheap beer. My brother Santiago had sent a message from back home. One file, one phrase, keep quiet. I opened the image and saw a chat. At the top, the group name, Familia de Verdad. The profile photo was a beach with bent palm trees. Below it, green and gray lines, a little crop field on a screen. And there they were, my father with his worn-out sergeant's tone, my mother with her ellipses that always sounded like sighs, and Santiago, my younger brother, typing with that nervous laugh of his. 2 other people were in the group, Yane and Fellow, the cousins from Matanzas. And I read. The ATM confirmed the transfer. Bang those pots, people. That was my father. Our little ATM never fails. Naive, but useful. He. That was my mother. We told him Grandma was sick and he sent extra. Let's celebrate in Veradero, ha ha ha. Santiago. Tell him we bought the house together. That way he won't ask questions. Yane. I stopped by the juice press column. My breath caught. I read it twice to make sure the words were real, black on gray, crystal clear. It's strange when your world breaks without a sound. It's like being underwater. The noises arrive late. Your heart wants to run but can't. I held the phone in one hand, the shopping cart in the other. I felt that if I let go, the wheels would start rolling on their own, and the chicken would take off running. I kept reading. They said the medical emergency was a lie, that the money from that month and the one before that had gone to close the big opportunity, an old but well-located house in Varadero, with a wide porch and chipped marble steps, modest heirlooms of a military family. They said the seller was the grandson of a retired general. Hero of nothing, my father had written, with that brand of sarcasm idiot that I had so often mistaken for rebellion. They said that if things went well, they could later sell it for twice as much to some loaded Mexican or a clueless Chilean just passing through. They said I'd never understand because life here had Americanized my blood. And then the worst line, the simplest, the cruelest, have the ATM send money tomorrow for the party. We need to touch the water. That's how he loosens up for the next transfer. I don't know how long I stared at the screen. I remember the bad supermarket music, someone laughing on the phone, a kid begging for cookies, a woman coughing. I walked out without buying a thing, like a thief. In the parking lot, the heat dropped over me like a bucket. I drank a beer right there, inside the truck, like it was a life raft. Then I called Santiago. He didn't answer the first time. Nor the second. On the third try, a small, frightened hello. I said his name as if I'd found it crumpled on the street. He said he couldn't talk. That yes, he'd sent me that without really thinking, that he'd had a lump in his throat for days, that he didn't want to be part of that group because it disgusted him, that they'd added him weeks ago when he'd stayed out of inertia like when you keep watching a car crash through the bus window. He asked me to forgive him. I told him we wouldn't talk over the phone. That we'd do a video call that night. All of them. I'd send the group link. Everyone would join. Santiago stayed silent for a moment. Then said, "Gabriel, please, take it easy, you don't know." I hung up. I went driving. Crossed the Howard Franklin Bridge with a dead man's calm. The water below was still, pretending to sleep. At some point, I felt the hatred anchoring my hands to the wheel. It wasn't hot. It didn't burn. It was a cold hatred, different, a knife with an ice handle. And beneath it, something older, a child's shame. The kind you feel when you realize you were used not out of malice, not out of need, but out of habit. When family becomes that word family, like a small, dirty business. I got home. Showered. Stayed there for a while in a towel, staring at the ceiling fan, thinking about the raft. The night we left Kojimar with the moon tilted like a loose coin, thinking courage was that doing the right thing, even when it hurt. No one prepares you for the other kind of courage, shutting off the valve, cutting the wire. The call was at 9, Tampa time. The WhatsApp screen split into poor little boxes. First came my mother, hair dyed and pinned up with a giant clip, smiling like at a funeral. Behind her, the living room and Miramar walls painted a damp white, a framed landscape of Pinar del Rio, the door to the porch half open, letting in invisible mosquitoes. My father sat in a corner with a glass in his hand and his shirt only half buttoned. Santiago appeared next, serious, with that patchy beard that never grew right. Yane joined from somewhere tiled in blue. Fellow didn't turn on his camera. I did what I had to do. No theatrics. I said good evening with the same tone I use on a job site when a client expects a miracle without paying for it. I counted to 3. Opened the file. Shared my screen. Put the screenshots from Familia de Verdad in front of their eyes. No one spoke. The Miramar house went stiff, as if the living room itself had clenched a fist. My mother was the first to try to speak. She said, "My son." I cut her off. Not because I didn't want to listen, but because she already knew there was nothing she could say that wouldn't be a lie. My father leaned back, searching for a joke to save him, his lifelong rope. I said, "Not tonight. Tonight you won't be charming. Tonight you'll be exact." Santiago lowered his eyes. Yane started typing in the private chat. I didn't open it. I took a breath and spoke like a man making a list. 1. As of tonight, all automatic transfers are cancelled. The bank ones, the apps, everything. 2. All internet top-ups, e-text lines, and cable subscriptions are cancelled. No more data packages. 3. Starting tomorrow, the 2 maids in the Miramar house are dismissed. Thank them for me, and pay them what they're owed up to today. They'll understand. 4. The monthly food boxes are over. Not as punishment. Out of respect. I don't send supplies to criminals. Hunger exists, but you don't have it. What you have is habit. 5. I don't want to hear a word about the Varadero house or the general's grandson. May your business prosper, and may the sea take its due. No one interrupted. I could hear all their breathing. Behind my mother, a curtain shifted. My father, voice rough, said, "Come down, Gabriel, this isn't such a big deal." It was a joke. You know how we are. The laugh he tried to pull out came dry, stuck to the roof of his mouth. I told him not to insult me again. If he wanted jokes, he could watch a comedy show. I kept counting. 6. Never use grandma's name again. She died without asking anyone for a dime. Don't stay in the only decent soul I have left. 7. If I ever hear you call me an ATM again, you'll never hear my voice again. My mother cried without tears, making a strange sound, animal-like, something that once would have broken me. But not now. What I felt instead was clarity, a clean corridor opening through me. Then Santiago spoke, his voice tight. He said, "Gabriel, and stopped. But he went on. He said he was tired too, that he'd wanted to tell me for months, that the cousins added him to the group like someone putting a cigarette between your lips when you're drunk. That they ran the whole scheme. That fellow met the general's grandson in a bar on the corner of 1st and 70th. That the medical emergency was my father's idea, and my mother hadn't stopped it in time. That the word Varadero had meant more to them than decency ever did. And then he said, like someone handing over a weapon, this didn't start with you. Uncle Pete, in Madrid, went through the same thing. They drained what was left of his pension for years, with stories about fixing the roof, hurricanes, grandma. Left him dry. He stopped talking to them because of it. He'll call you. He'll tell you you did the right thing. Uncle Pete. We always called him that, even when I was a kid and imagined him in black and white, like an old movie. To me, he was that man who left in '59, the one my father dismissed as the romantic. An exile walking the streets of Madrid with Havana still in his eyes, who, they said, could still find Cuba in the bars, the Cuba that smells not of slogans but of blood and coffee. I didn't know they'd milked him too. All in whispers. All with that soft tone people use when they ask for just this, just for now. My father tried to get up from his chair and seemed to remember he was on camera. My mother, with her drawing room courage, lifted her chin. She told me I was overreacting. That you can't just leave us like this, in the middle of everything. That the house in Varadero wasn't a luxury, it was an investment for the future. That nothing there can be built without opportunities like this. Then it slipped out, at least you didn't leave for nothing. I told her that nothing was everything to me. That what I said still stood. That my account no longer saw theirs. That my hand no longer lit their lights. And that if they had even the decency of true poverty, I'd know what to do with this, but what moves them isn't hunger, it's vanity. That fever back home that only a beach photo can cure. My father lowered his voice, like he was bargaining for a bribe. He said I knew how the system worked, that regret in Cuba was a luxury, that sometimes you had to wade through shit to get out of the swamp. I told him shit doesn't pull you out of the swamp, it makes mud. And that there's a point where fear looks a lot like desire. That I wanted no part in their arithmetic. I told him about the raft. I reminded him of the foam in my mouth, the night that moved without moving, the fish that were shadows, and the border guards who were smaller ones. I told him that when I arrived in Tampa, I slept on the floor my first night, and still felt rich. Because nobody owned me. Because I owed no one. And that they had invented a debt just to parade it around in swimsuits. The call cooled into a thick silence. My mother said my son again, now like a prayer. She begged me not to hang up, to listen, that I'd misunderstood, that they weren't mocking me, that it was just an expression. She said, "Your father exaggerates." She said, "Your brother's not well." She said all the things people say when they're trying to move pain from one room to another. I closed my eyes. I gave myself a second of doubt, not for them, for me. For that part of me that still wants to be the man who fixes things. Then I looked at the screenshot again. Read ATM. Read naive but useful. Read party. And the doubt left me like a mosquito finally swatted. I said it was over. That if they loved me, they'd let me go. My father, as if he hadn't heard, asked in that calculating tone, "And the rent for the maids?" I told him the word he was looking for wasn't rent, it was salary. And I'd already covered it in point 3. I repeated it, slowly. I felt a rush of something red, not desire, fury, rising up my throat. "I don't ever want to talk about money with you again." My mother threw the final dart, the old one, "You've been Americanized." The word hit my skin and bounced off. I said, "Yes." And added, "And what a relief not to think like you." I ended the call. No slamming, no noise. Just the silence of my kitchen and the hum of the refrigerator, like an old animal breathing. I barely slept. Thoughts came like dogs, licking your hand when you're down. Around 2 a.m. I went out for a walk. Crossing an empty street in Tampa at night feels like walking on a darkened stage, the city stripped of its costumes. The air smelled of pine and humidity. I reached a small park where no tourists go, sat on a bench, and stared at nothing. In the distance, I could hear a train. I thought about Veradero. About the porch with broken marble. About Yane's laugh. My mother's eyes. My father's glass. Guilt feels like a wet coat. It doesn't warm you, it weighs you down. I took it off. The next morning, I started shutting valves. Called the bank. Canceled transfers. Opened a spreadsheet and crossed things out. Called the shipping company. No more. In the top-up app, plan by plan, button by button, I logged out. I had to dig through a drawer to find an old notebook, to remember passwords for accounts I'd created for them myself. The sum of my care was now a collection of locks. The phone wouldn't stop vibrating, messages from my mother filled with half-phrases, sad emojis, voice notes I didn't open. My father, dry, think about it. Yane, we're in shock. Fellow sent a thumbs up, like an idiot. Santiago wrote, "Thank you." That word broke me a little, because it sounded inverted, him thanking me for doing what I owed to myself. At noon, while I ate rice and beans at a Cuban restaurant in West Tampa, you never stop eating what you come from, no matter how much it hurts, my phone rang with a number from Spain. I answered right there at the table, unashamed. Pete's voice came through, clean, younger than I remembered. He said Gabriel, like a hand on my shoulder. Said he'd talked to Santiago, that he knew. That he'd gone through the same thing, years of sending money, with stories of leaking roofs and growling stomachs, until one day he heard laughter behind the phone and realized they weren't laughing with him, but at him. "It's not about the money," he said. "It's the gesture. They turn you into the generous uncle in the movie, then brush you down like an old horse." He laughed, but it wasn't laughter. He said I'd done right. That it hurts, that it makes you feel like a double traitor, but it's the kind of cut that saves you. He spoke of Madrid as if describing a tidy room with clear windows. Told me that when you leave the cage stays inside you for a while. You have to take it out piece by piece. Today you removed one. I hung up feeling different. Pete's voice was like those soft taps you give a jar lid before it opens. I felt less alone. Men rarely say it, but loneliness isn't always lack of people, it's the absence of someone who can say your name without charging you for it. The days that followed were like a cold shower every 2 hours. I checked my account, and for the first time in ages, those numbers felt mine, as if I'd evicted intruders. I slept better. One Sunday morning I ran along the Riverwalk, watching the sun climb over the downtown buildings, and that golden light stuck to my eyes. Redemption, a heavy word, isn't an ending. It's a color that settles on your shoulder like a bird, if you don't scare it off. The performances came, of course. My mother tried illness. A cough. A fever. I hadn't told you. I didn't bite. My father tried pride. We don't need you. Fine. Then why are you calling? You can love someone and still see their seams. Love is that too, looking without lying. And hatred, that hatred I've sharpened all my life against the liars who rule the island. I've learned to aim it properly, not at hunger, not at human flaw, but at the system that, with its slow rot, teaches you to cheat, to steal your own children, to celebrate with what isn't yours, to feel clever because you know who to call to fix what shouldn't be broken. I couldn't help picturing the house in Varadero. I painted it in my head 1,000 times, faded paint, a yard shaded by sea grapes, the sticky voice of the radio, the smell of chlorine in the bathroom tiles. The general's grandson counting bills with yellowed fingers, not needing anyone's eyes. My parents walking in with plastic bags full of useless, noisy things. Yane's laughter echoing down the block. Sometimes, passing Bayshore when the water was still, I imagined that house sunken under the sea, its curtains drifting slowly, impossibly. One afternoon, Santiago wrote to say he wanted to talk. I answered by video, same kitchen table, the yellow lamp now part of my little theater. He said he'd left the group. That he'd fought with my father. That my mother called him long tongue. That he was thinking of leaving. Where to? I asked. Somewhere I don't have to laugh when someone steals, he said. I smiled, tiredly. It was the first sentence of someone who doesn't yet know, but already smells the truth. I told him I couldn't promise anything, that coming to Tampa isn't a red carpet, that the cold here isn't in the skin but in the distance, that you'll miss even the flaws. But if he came, I'd pick him up at the airport. He said he didn't know when, but that he's been sleeping better since I cut them off. And he said thank you again, this time with a tone closer to an apology, or more than an apology, an alliance. Around then, a client hired me to install floors in an old house in Seminole Heights. A wooden house, the kind that creaks like it's trying to talk. I worked alone, with the radio off. Measure, cut, fit. Each plank in its place. I felt something like what I'd felt on the raft, a mix of fear and resolve, only now the sea wasn't the danger. My own story was. And the decision was not to add another lie. I found a rhythm. The body knows when it's finally doing what it was meant to do. One night, after a long day, I went to a quiet bar in Channelside, ordered a whiskey, and sat outside. The breeze carried that river smell that settles me. I thought about how everything that happened might sound so small when told in phrases. He found a chat, got angry, cut them off. No. It was deeper than that. It was a man staring into the mirror of his own need to be loved. I wanted to be loved, of course I did. Who doesn't? And that's what made me useful. I had to break a little to let that go. I realized that for years I'd been a provider wearing the mask of a son. And that my mask had suited them perfectly. The last call I made was the shortest. I dialed my mother and spoke before she could find her tone. I told her that, in case there were any doubts left, what I did wasn't punishment, it was a boundary. And boundaries are said once. From then on, if they want to talk about anything else, we can talk. If they want to talk about money, they can call their general. She said something I didn't fully catch. I hung up gently, quietly, like closing the door to a room where someone's sleeping. I haven't seen the Varadero house in photos again. I don't know if it truly exists or if it's just another property floating in that cloud of sad papered homes passed from hand to hand between rumors and toasts. I don't care. I've kept another house, this kitchen with its ugly lamp, my bed with clean sheets, the path to the shower with cold tiles that wake you up, the bare living room, the truck parked outside with the tools inside, the sneakers by the door. All mine, not by ownership, but by use. The silence here, now, has a golden color I'd never known. Sometimes, running along the river walk at dawn, when the light hits the buildings like lit-up boxes, a memory of the raft comes back. My chest tightens. Not from the fear I felt then, but from the fear I no longer feel. And I tell myself, without any heroism, I'm not an ATM. I'm a man. Made of plaster and wood, with nails in my fingers, useful for what I choose. In this city I learned to love, step by step. People have called me hard. Maybe I am. Tenderness looks like that too, when it stops allowing abuse. The hatred I feel for those who turned my country into a black market will never leave me. It lives here, under my ribs, like a splinter reminding me each day what not to repeat. And the contempt for those who adapted to that under-the-table game, laughing, pretending that cunning was intelligence that I keep, calmly, like a bullet you won't fire, but won't forget is loaded. The Monday after it all, a client called from Davis Islands. He wanted an estimate. I crossed the bridge, looked at the boats, saw couples running with their dogs. Life finally looked like life again. I entered the house, measured, took notes. The man talked about the texture he wanted. I told him about the hardness of the wood, how it behaves with humidity. He understood. We closed the deal. He paid me in advance. I stepped outside into the sunlight, stood on the sidewalk for a minute, breathed. The light didn't burn. I walked to my truck feeling that the day was in order. I thought of Uncle Pete, in Madrid, his voice saying, "Today you took out another piece of the cage." I smiled. Thought of Santiago, maybe looking at the sea from the Malecon, thinking about the Howard Franklin without knowing its name. I thought of my hands, still trembling a little when I opened my banking app, not from fear, but from memory. If I tell this, it's because sometimes, when you finally cut ties, there's no applause. No toast. Just an empty echo that scares you. It feels like loneliness. But then the house fills up again, with clean air. The furniture returns to its place. The hum of the refrigerator stops being noise and becomes company. You make coffee. Drink it slowly. Look out the window. See Tampa waking up, sunlight climbing over the water. Cars crossing. People walking their dogs. Everything simple. And you find yourself at peace with two words you used to avoid, enough and mine. I don't know if they'll forgive me. I can't bring myself to ask forgiveness for this. And still, writing it cost me something. Blood doesn't wash, it's accepted. Mine is mixed with salt and wood, with anger and patience, with years of work and a wrath that still creaks in my dreams. I've stopped sending. Stopped answering calls that only ask, when? I've chosen something else. And though I carry the scar of the obedient son I killed to save the man who remained, I walk lighter now. They can say whatever they want in their new group, with its beach photo. I have my own, the one I see when I drive down Bayshore and the sun hits the water, a long line of light cutting its way through, asking no permission. And that's enough for me to keep going. Maybe someday I'll speak to them again, and we'll do it without gloves, without excuses. I don't know. What I do know is that last night, I slept straight through. And when I woke, for the first time in a long while, the silence didn't hurt. Because silence, when it isn't full of guilt, sounds like a safe place. And that place, today, finally feels like me.